Associate of the Royal Academy of Music, and he's currently the Director of Grand Opera Thailand. I've had the pleasure of knowing Stefan for several years through his work with Grand Opera. He has a wonderful baritone voice, and we are so lucky that he is able to speak to us today. This bit is a plug. Pattaya Classical Music are putting on a concert May the 19th. Stefan is bringing down Grand Opera. It's operatic arias and songs, individual songs from some of the musicals. Proceeds are going to Pattaya Orphanage and various other charities. If you'd like to purchase tickets, come and see me when the meeting finishes. Having said that, I would now like to ask Stefan to come on stage and give us his talk. Thanks, Stefan. It's not being switched on. The back here.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Pattaya Expats Club. Pattaya City Expats Club. It is a great pleasure to meet you. I hope that's the one and only heckle. And I am going to attempt to do a little bit of everything today in respect of the world of singing, mainly associated with opera. There isn't enough time to go through the whole gamut of the vocal repertoire. So what I'd like to do is to start off with a little song from written by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart from The Marriage of Figaro. At this point, the Figaro, who is betrothed to Susanna. Does anybody know the story? Okay, it's a story originally by Beaumarchais, part of a trilogy, and it was set to music by Mozart via Da Ponte, who was one of his main librettists. Here we are in the castle of Aguafiestas, which is near Seville. Previously, the Count Almaviva, who is now married to Rosina, who is the Countess, had her sequestrated from her uncle or guardian in Seville, and that was the Barber of Seville, which was actually Beaumarchais' first book of the trilogy. And now they are unhappily married, unfortunately, in the castle in Aguafiestas, and she is very upset because her husband is a philanderer. He's after anything in a skirt. And unfortunately, he's also after Figaro's betrothed, and he's trying to impose le droit des seigneurs. Does anybody know what that is? Well, le droit des seigneurs, that was this amazing thing where if you were the local lord, you had first pick of the new brides before the husband got there, which they were trying to abolish. And so this is where Figaro is saying to poor little Cherubino, who is also after anything in a skirt, but he's only 14 years old, so he can't really reach that high, he's going to have to go down, going to have to go to the war. What a shame, and he's basically making fun of him. Non per mai farfallone amoroso, notte e giorno di corpo girando, delle belle turbando il riposo, Narcisetto a bacino d'amor. Delle turbando il riposo, Narcisetto a bacino d'amor. Okay, can we start that again at a good volume? Sorry, a little technical difficulty due to the fact that I haven't had a rehearsal.
Also, we can't, the clickers stopped working, so he can't control the volume.
Non vedrai il valore amoroso, notte giorno di torno girando, delle vele curvate di riposo, nanti c'è qua bacino d'amor. Delle vele curvate di riposo, nanti c'è qua bacino d'amor. Non proverò in questi bei pinacchi, quel capello leggero e gallante, quella fiora, quell'aria brillante, quel vermiglio modesto color, quel vermiglio modesto color. Non avrai che pinacchi, quel cappello, quella fiora, quell'aria brillante, non avrai calcalone amoroso, notte giorno di torno girando, quella bella amore riposo, nanti c'è quando giro d'amor. Quella bella amore riposo, nanti c'è quando giro d'amor. La vecchia potrà fatto, per lo stato stretto sotto, dove sbaglia, sciamagliato, quella dritto, muso franco, un gran casso, un gran turbante, molto color, molto colcante, molto colcante, molto colcante. Ed invece del fandango, guarda per il fango, e montagne per balloni, e montagne per balloni, il concetto di tromboni, il concetto di tromboni, delle palle tutti i cuori, all'orecchio fammi sfior, non li avrai, che pena chi, quel cappello, non li avrai, quella chioma, non li avrai, quel voglio brillante. Non vedrai un farfallone amoroso, notte giorno di torno girando, delle vele che voglio il riposo, nanti c'è quando giro d'amor. Delle vele che voglio il riposo, nanti c'è quando giro d'amor. Che non viva la vittoria, alla gloria mi implora, che la viva la vittoria, alla gloria mi implora, alla gloria mi implora, alla gloria mi implora.
After 10 days lying on a beach in the Philippines, I'm very surprised that came out at all. But thank you very much. So that was Mozart's Marriage of Figaro. And now I'd like to turn, I've got one more little song to sing before I tell you how it's done. And before I actually get some of you to try it out. Do we have volunteers here? Vocal volunteer, one. Well, one. 2, 3. Ah, marvelous. Okay. Okay, so this next song is by PCEC, and it's called opera comique, but owing to the fact that the heroine gets stabbed outside the bullring by her lover who has previously committed murder, it's not terribly funny, to be perfectly honest. There are some amusing characters, but opera comique really referred to the fact that there was dialogue, spoken dialogue, in the opera itself. So that basically covered that. Essentially, it was just a serious opera with some very colourful characters. Carmen, the gypsy girl, the wild, sultry gypsy girl from Seville. Escamillo, Seville's most famous toreador. Don Jose, who plays the tenor character, who has the misfortune to fall in love with Carmen, but she changes her lovers as often as she changed her socks. which was once every 6 months. Not terribly often, but for the lovers it was quite often. And here is Camilo, who has just fought a bull and is overwhelmed with his victory and wants obviously to tell everybody about how wonderful he is. So if I could have number 2, please. Nice and loud.
Seigneur, car avec les soldats, oui, mais votre cause vous la rende, Seigneur, car avec les soldats, il est torpedos, que j'entends, toutes les filles, toutes les filles, dans les combats. Le cirque est plein, ces jours de fête, le cirque est plein, dit au combat. Les spectateurs, et dans la tête, et le spectateur, sans un peine, pour le apostrophe, tristesse, avage, tout ce jusque j'avoue, c'est la fête du courage, c'est la fête des chants de guerre. Non, allons, toreador, on garde, toreador, change bien, oui, change en combattant, que l'œil noir te régale, et que l'amour t'attend, toreador, l'amour t'attend. On fait silence, à que se passe-t-il? Qui cherchons, le taureau se lance en disant, à l'hypocrite, il se lance, identifiable, un cheval roule entre l'enfant d'abord.
you very much indeed. Thank you very much. And so that was from Bizet's Carmen after a book by Mérimée. So, I'm going to give you a very quick little potted history of how I came to be an opera singer. Well, very simply, I was entertaining people like yourselves from a very young age, perhaps as young as this gentleman here, singing songs that my mother taught me. You know, the old, if you were the only girl in the world and I was the only boy. I'm sure a few of you probably know those songs. Perhaps your mothers taught you. I'm not saying they were there when they were actually written. And that kind of got me thinking that this was quite fun standing in front of people and being sort of, you know, being paid attention to for once. And so I then decided to do something about it and became a professional opera singer and went to the Royal Academy of Music and had 4 very fruitful and happy years at the Royal Academy of Music. There was a subsidised bar, so that really helped my music studies. And I found that I started singing. I was in the West End doing musicals because I didn't really care whether it was opera or oratorio or lieder or musicals, as long as there was an orchestra, a conductor, a stage, an audience, and some money at the end of the week. I was perfectly happy. So I did that, and one of my first jobs was with, anybody remember Noel Gordon, Crossroads? Well, when she'd been unceremoniously sacked from Crossroads, she went into musicals because that was what she was doing before she went on telly. And so she went to a show called Call Me Madam, and I was the Prime Minister, I played the Prime Minister of Lichtenberg. It's a very strange kind of story. But at one point, the Americans who are there helping, as they always do when they're in these countries, said, why don't you have elections in Lichtenberg? And without, I said, elections? State, we haven't had an election in Lichtenberg for 100 years. And I thought, that really got a good laugh this time. That's amazing. So that was my first foray into professional life. Then I decided that singing wasn't quite enough. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't quite enough. So I formed something called the European Chamber Opera. And that came about because I'd actually been in Spain, in Santiago de Compostela, and doing the Spanish music course. And because I spoke Spanish and English, people thought I knew what I was doing, so they asked me to fix a string quartet for a book that was coming out about Beethoven. So I did that. And then went back to England and was actually singing in Madrid when someone came up to me, it was my day off, someone came up to me in what would be the worst restaurant in Escorial. Escorial is where the kings and queens of Spain are buried, and said, do you remember me? And my usual reply to that is, of course I remember you, how are you? And he was prepared for that, so he said, yes, and I went, oh yes. And so he said, are you still a music agent? And I went, oh, yeah, absolutely, I'm still a music agent. And so he said, can you bring an opera company over to Menorca Ciudadela? And I said, sure, why not? So I did. It was an opera company that I'd actually just formed on the spot. And we did some operas there, and then I just started doing opera. It was the great late Freddie Mercury that started me off in my first big opera production, because when he died, a friend of his, who was also a friend of mine, said he would like to do Trovatore, which was the first opera that Freddie had been taken to at the Royal Opera House, and he would like to present that at one of the theatres. And Montserrat Caballé, who he'd done the album Barcelona with, was part of, was very famous for her role in Trovatore. So we did, and Montserrat became our patron. She was actually at the Royal Opera House at the time, doing Viaggio a Reims, a not very well-known Rossini opera, and she came and she saw it and said, I love it, you're so wonderful, darling, so wonderful. And so we became European Chamber Opera with Montserrat Caballé as our patron. We travelled the world, we travelled all over England, of course, and Europe, and basically the world, doing big productions in the States and all of Europe. Then I started Opera Holland Park. I didn't start Opera Holland Park. I started their resident company. Opera Holland Park is probably one of the best known opera summer festivals in England, I should think by now. And that was a very interesting part of my life. And I did realise that I had this kind of desire to run opera companies. At that point, I had not been teaching. I didn't consider myself to be good enough or mature enough to be able to teach. But an interesting episode happened. The Royal Academy rang me up about after I started Opera Holland Park, and they said, "Mr. Sanchez, this is the Royal Academy of Music here." I went, "Oh, is it about the library books?" And they went, "Library books?" Yes, I meant to give them back. This was 10 years later. You know, I'm planning any day now. And they said, "No, it's not about library books." I said, "What is it about?" And they said, "Well, we've decided we'd like to give you an ARAM." I went, "Oh, that's very nice." Not having the faintest idea what an ARAM is. It stands for a RAM, as far as I can see. So they said, "And we want to know if you'll accept it, if we offer it," because obviously they weren't sure whether I'd accept it. I was quite good at my job, but I was also a bit of a maverick. So I didn't really blame them for checking. I said, "Well, the first thing I thought, do I have to wear an academic gown?" And they said, "No." I said, "Is there a party?" And they said, "No." "Do I get a glass of sherry?" "No." So I said, "Okay." Then we sent it in the post. I said, "Fine, send it in the post." And they said, "And about these library books?" I said, "Bye, thank you." And that was, so it came through the post. And then I rang a friend of mine. I said, who was a composer, I said, "Paul, what's an ARAM?" Because I didn't know what it was. And he said, "Why do you want to know?" I went, "Well, I just want to know what an ARAM is." He said, "Well, it's especially the Royal Academy of Music, and it means that you've distinguished yourself in your career, blah, 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 blah." And I went, "Oh, well, the Academy have just offered me one." And he went, there was a longer silence. You? They offered you one? He was obviously there when I was at the Academy. "I've been trying to get one for years. Why have they offered you one?" I said, "Well, probably because I'm employing hundreds of singers and running 2 opera companies, maybe." And he went, "Oh yes, so." So that's how I got my ARM, and I'm very grateful to the Academy for giving it to me. And now what I'd like to do is turn slightly to a little bit of how the voice is produced. I don't know whether you're that interested, so I'm going to go whizzing through. Can everybody point to their throat? Ah, well done. Do you know what a cricopharyngeus is? No? Ah, here we go. Look. So you see, that, and that make up your throat. The outer bit, the hard bit of your throat, as you can see. Next. Sorry, what are you doing? There's the shield cartridge. The shield cartridge, sorry, I should have said that in the first place. This is the arytenoid cartridges, which are connected to your vocal folds. And they swivel. And according to how they swivel, how nicely they swivel, will give you the quality, in a way, of, or at least a good start, of your tone. Let's move on. Here it's all together. You see you've got one bit at the top, bit at the bottom, and a bit in the middle. And you have the vocal folds there. Now that's very nice, and that's cradled by something called the suspensory mechanism, which is a series of muscles that pull up, pull down, and pull back. The lower suspensory mechanism, that's going towards, that little bit there is going towards your chest, and that little bit there is going towards the back of your neck, you see. And these have to move very smoothly. Next. And there you can see the movement now. But you can't really do that like this. It's very difficult. You actually have to use something which we'll discuss later, which is basically your respiratory system in an operatic way in order to be able to get that going. Next. And there you can see that the arytenoid cartridge is at work. Here you can see the vocal folds, and there at the center is called the glottis. The glottis is extremely important because there's a little space in the vocal folds that you can actually in some ways control and can give you the sound that you require. Obviously that takes about 10 years to figure out how to do it, but you can do it in the end. So there we have, and those are the muscles of the lateralis side there, which affect the quality of the movement of the vocals. There's lots of muscles, obviously, controlling the irisoid cartilages to give you a different kind of sound. Next, please. Back. Skip. Yes. Now there's the suspensory mechanism, and that's the most important part of the vocal equipment. You can see that you have the lower suspensory at D, the upper at C, and the cricopharyngeus at E, and that's the hyoid that's attached to the tongue bone, which is what actually is a terrible nuisance, because the back of your tongue is attached to your throat, which is why people often sing with a throaty sound, because it is part of the suspensory mechanism, and it is the most accessible and it's the most irritating because it's the one that gets in the way most of the time. The cricopharyngeus at the back, number E, pulls everything back. Now that's the qualitative difference between an opera singer and a non-opera singer. Is that if you're a pop singer, a jazz singer to some extent, and certainly a rock singer, you won't be using that at the back, because this is what gives you the quality of and of course, she loves you, yeah. Doesn't really use that, okay? But this, unfortunately, is all connected to the muscles of the here. Now, I'm going to assure you that I am an athlete. Look at me. Can you see the athleticism? Well, let's put this to the test. You look like a friendly person. Would you press my stomach? Would you put your hand on my stomach? No, my stomach. There we go. You see, you feel the muscle. Yeah. That's why I look fat. I'm actually Arnold Schwarzenegger on it here. Okay. Anybody at look, my future employer. Here you go. And yeah, not bad. See you later. So these are highly developed, or should I say overdeveloped, abdominal muscles, which are obviously the most important part in singing at the front. And at the back we have the same thing. We have something called the sacrospinalis. Can we move on? See if I can find those. Yeah, there it is. Oh! Sacrospinalis? Yeah, there we go. The inner muscles of the back. These are incredibly important because they actually have connection to the cricoid, the cricopharyngeus. There, you see? So that you can hear the way that works. But they go all the way down to your bum. So the next time you say to someone, you're talking out of your bum, mate, you are physiologically correct. Because that's what happens. And you need that in order to be able to speak. Okay, so let's move on. And these, of course, are the broad muscles of the back, and they are also vitally important to the active support, which is called support. Now, support is a very difficult thing to imagine and to learn, because we have people think support is hold your stomach in, which is good if you're on the beach, gentlemen, and you want to impress. But it won't help you sing or throw your chest out, which is great if you've got a series of medals you want to show off, but it won't help you sing. In fact, what singing is basically all of the muscles of respiration from the knees, believe it or not, upwards, which are connected, and which are connected in such a way that they just swivel. It's a bit like the workings of a Swiss watch. Something goes like that, something goes like that, something goes like that, something goes like that, and the hands go round. Okay? So it's actually quite a complex business, which is why it takes about as long to learn to sing as it is to become a successful neurosurgeon. But we don't earn as much money unless we happen to be Pavarotti. So let's move on. And there you have those magnificent muscles at the front. As you can see, they go into the ribs. You also have intercostal muscles. Anybody who likes pork ribs will be chewing their way through intercostal muscles regularly, and you will see that when you pull them apart, they're in strands, and those strands different strands control breathing in and breathing out. So they do different jobs. Okay, move on. And this is basically the movement of the exhalation, the respiratory scaffolding, which shows how the breath goes. And again. And the same here, the in-breath and the out-breath. Essentially, the red is the in-breath, the out is the out-breath. And how that moves, how you can see that even down to your bottom, everything is actually used in singing. Again, one of the most important exit areas that I'm constantly getting my students to use is the black arrow, just under the back of the neck, the nape of the neck. Incredibly important. The Italians call it la seconda bocca, the second mouth. It is as important as the front, if not more. So essentially, singing is a what should we call it, organic, holistic. It's something, everything is working when you sing. Of course, the resonators as well, which are located mainly in the head, the upper chest bone. Those will give you what this microphone is doing for me right now. And that basically will allow you to sing over a symphony orchestra. Carry on. And these are the most important chest muscles, the inner chest muscles, which are, with the Italians, find that they can use very easily. It's called the colpo di petto. Everything has to be directed from the back, from the diaphragm, all has to be directed towards the inner chest muscles. It cannot go directly towards the throat, because if it goes directly towards the throat, you will be fighting a constant war with your throat, putting too much subglottal pressure on your throat, and your throat will fight back. And the more it fights back, the more pressure you'll put on, so you end up screaming, basically. Rod Stewart does it regularly. So, move on. Now, this is where I would like you to help. And we have vowels U, I, O, E, A. Can we say that? Do you mind? U, I, E. Oh, sorry. U, I, O, E, A. Can you at all feel different places where those are registered? Have a look at the diagram. U, I, O, E, A. Okay? So the R is at the furthest back, basically, and it's the most difficult vowel to sing, believe it or not, because unless you happen to have a mother who's good at cooking pasta. If you're Italian, no problem. No problem. Do we have Italians here? No Italians? Are they not allowed in? Okay. All right. I don't blame you. I've met some. Okay, so I can do it because I've been practicing for about 40 years, but and use it as an actual training mechanism. But so what we actually need is we need the whole lot to be mixed. So we go ya, ye, yi, yo, you. So we're going to start from the back. Try that with the ya. This is a half vowel ya, which will bring everything forward. Ya, ye, yi, yo, you. And then you'll get yo. So then you'll get a mixture of everything. Most of this, once you've innovated the muscles for that, you can then use your imagination, and the placement will come through imagination. Because these things are so difficult to direct, you have to use your imagination most of the time in order to get the direction. Which is where some singing teachers will basically say, oh, darling, imagine you're hanging out and washing. So I heard that when I was a 16-year-old boy, my first lessons, which I never actually hung out washing before. So, but I had to imagine I was hanging out washing. Or imagine you're digging a hole. Or imagine this, or imagine that. Eventually, when you've learned to sing, you think back at these visual images and you realize they actually did make sense, but they make no sense at all when you're trying to conquer the physiology of it. And there are two distinct schools of singing. One comes from the empiric knowledge, which was from, say, 16th century, 17th century, 18th, 19th, pre-laryngoscope. Castrati teachers were the best teachers in the vocal world. And obviously they sang in falsetto, but that didn't make any difference. No, they sang in their natural voices, but it sounded like falsetto. And then after that, at the turning point, a man called Manuel Garcia then opened up the rest by the invention of the laryngoscope, and so scientific knowledge was available to singers. However, the scientific knowledge, 90% of the scientific knowledge then validated what they knew before. So basically, the art of singing actually has gone through a little dip. The art of bel canto is only just being rediscovered, and this was what people understood by using their ears. They could actually understand that. So my first, what I would like to do now is to move on to Tosca. Does everybody know Tosca? Tosca? Tosca is by, there's resonators, we might as well keep going. Do you have one before that? Oh, sorry. This is the magic flute. Keep going, because I'm going to run out of time. So stop that there, we'll have that in a minute. Okay? So, can you stop that? Okay. So, Tosca is a story by, it's a play by a man called Sardou. It was a 5-act play and it was absolute rubbish as a play. It was 5-act, it was terrible. But the main thrust of the story was really rather ingenious. And so it deals with Tosca, Floria Tosca, who's a famous opera singer, and she is in love with Cavaradossi, who's an aristocrat, but he's getting in trouble because he's actually on the wrong side. This is all taking place in Rome, and on the eve of the Battle of Marengo. And Scarpia lusts in a very Marquis de Sade way after Tosca and threatens to have her lover Cavaradossi executed if he does not get his nasty little way with her. And so she agrees, but she insists that he writes out a passport. It's a complicated way of getting a passport. And a safe passage, basically. And he then, as he's writing it, she sees a fruit knife and she stabs him mercilessly with it. She then lays him out on the floor, lights 4 candles, and as she's leaving, she says, "E avanti lui tutta Roma tremava." And in front of you, all Rome trembled. And then she leaves the castle Sant'Angelo. Cavaradossi is up there waiting to be executed. She gets into her carriage, goes back home, collects her jewellery and her furs, and obviously says goodbye to everybody, and then comes back to the castle, goes up to the battlements and says, "Don't worry, Cavaradossi, this it's going to be a mock execution. They won't really kill you, but just fall down when you hear the bang of the blanks going off." Unfortunately for her, Scarpia has tricked her, and in fact they are real bullets, and he really does fall down dead. And then, an hour later, the soldiers come up and realise that Scarpia is dead, and they try and get hold of, they try and catch Tosca, and she throws herself off the battlements. This is the famous throwing themselves off the battlements scene, and the soprano, who's generally, well proportioned, floats nicely down onto a mattress. But there was one famous soprano who pissed off the stage management, so they put a trampoline there instead. So she went down, she went went down, up, went down, went up, went down. And and this is one of my students called Mai, and she is going to sing Visitate, which was when Tosca realizes that she has to give in to Scarpia. believe it or not, that was 3 or 4 years ago, and she actually sings even better than that. So she was a wonderful singer. Can we go on to Di Provenza? I will sing you hang on a second. This is from Traviata, La Traviata. This is by Verdi. And this is where Alfredo, does anybody know Traviata at all? Okay, so very quickly, Alfredo is in love with Traviata, who happens to be the highest paid courtesan in Paris. And she, for some reason, falls head over heels in love with him, so she ends up paying for everything. She's also suffering from consumption, tuberculosis at the time. And this is again where you have this the Montserrat Caballé, who's absolutely enormous and a wonderful singer, playing a 22-year-old girl suffering from consumption, which that's where you operatically suspend your imagination into a world of opera unreality. But she is married with him. However, the scandal has basically caused terrible tragedy for the family of Alfredo, because the sister cannot get married unless this scandalous affair is terminated. And so Jean Père, played by the baritones traditionally in opera are always getting in the way of the tenor and the soprano getting it on together, basically. So that's usually been my pleasure. And so here he's telling Alfredo, you have to come back home, we miss you, we want you, and forget that woman.
Di Provenza il mare il suol, chi dal porticangelo, chi dal porticangelo, di Provenza il mare il suol, al natio fulgente sol, qual vestio ti furò, vestio tipo al attio fulgente sol, lamento nel cuor chi di gioia te brillò, e per pace con la suor su te splende ancor tuo, e il suo tetto si coprì di squallor, ma se fin ti trovò
just finish with one thing, and that is who I consider to be the inheritor, now dead unfortunately, of Puccini. Puccini was one of the greatest opera dramatists we have ever had in this country in time. And his ability to shape the drama from usually pretty rough texts that through his collaborators Giocosa and Illica was able to create some very tight, exciting dramatic moments through all of his operas. Not without a great deal of shouting and drinking and arguing, which then produced these wonderful operas. His use of the orchestra was very interesting because although the characters might be lying to each other, the truth is always in the orchestra. So when I direct an opera, I've directed an opera for many years, I don't ignore the vocal line, but I pay more attention to what's going on in the orchestra. If you look, all the work is done for you. You just have to look for the clues, and then directing is as easy as directing people onto a bus. So basically, the man who took over the mantle from that was an English composer called Benjamin Britten. Anybody know Benjamin Britten? Oh, one, two, three, four, yeah, marvelous. And he was incredibly successful at setting texts. And this, first of all, I'd like to play you the text of from the Shakespeare play, Midsummer Night's Dream, as spoken by Sir John Gielgud. Have you got that there? No, that's That's it. That's it. That's it.
That was it.
Welcome, Mondra.
Okay.
Do you want the final?
Oh no, sorry. I want the one before that. The speech, not the. Yeah, that's it.
I know a bed where the wild thyme blows, where ox slips and the nodding violet grows, quiet over canopied with luscious woodbine, with sweet musk roses and with eglantine. There sleeps Titania sometime of the night, lulled in these flowers, with dances and delight. And there the snake throws her enamel skin, weed wide enough to wrap a fairy in. And with the juice of this, I'll streak her eyes and make her full of hateful fantasies.
So that was Oberon's scene, and now we have it. And now it will be sung. That's still being read. It's a bit of a modern production. You can move it on can you move it on a bit?
Welcome, wanderer. Where's
Thank you. Sorry, I just realised that was a kind of like a low notification. I should be really singing the Barbara Seville, but I can't. So, thank you very much indeed. I hope you enjoyed some of that. And and it's been a great pleasure singing and speaking to you today. Thank you.
Any questions? Any questions? Oh, yes, okay, Bill.
Thank you very much. This was very, very interesting. As we discussed already, I have a boy who is interested in music. I have many, many questions myself, but I don't want to ask them. So I ask you a question that is about him, because most males are going through a voice break when they are 13 to 15 years old or what have you. What is your opinion about what should the kids do before you come into the voice break in terms of singing?
Well, I've actually had 2 or 3 students, but I do teach children as well. So I've had 2 or 3 young students who I've nurtured through from pre-voice breaking to voice breaking. And the wonderful thing is, the voices, if they were beautiful to start with, they continue being beautiful through that transition period. The other thing, which is absolutely marvelous, is the technique or the voice production, the use of the muscles, which I teach to them as children, as prepubescent, continues. They have to just do more of the same because the voice is much heavier. I can tell it's about to break because they start losing notes around the area that people call the passaggio. And they begin to lose those notes, and so at the point of breaking, then you go, oh, you need to take a few months off so you can get over the break, and then we'll continue. And then we generally do. And yeah, I had one child who was starring in Impact Theatre in Boy in a Tiger, an opera. And my job, the composer said, there was a famous composer here called Bruce Gaston, American, is that you've got to keep this voice, this kid's voice up during the show. So my job was to basically try and, the impossible, King Canute basically couldn't do it, and that was to try to keep him as a voice soprano. But he did, and now he's a young man bass. He's gone from soprano to bass, basically he did that in about 6 months. So, and a few other children like that. So it's a bit distressing for them. I mean, I'm saying, it's a wonderful thing, you're going to be a man. Yes, but I really like my voice. So, you know, it's a difficulty there.
Thank you, Stefan, that was amazing. I'm a friend of mine's a voice coach in England, and are you based in Pattaya or Bangkok, or what?
I'm based in Bangkok. I teach in Bangkok. I do teach Skype. I've got Skype students in Paris. I have a male soprano, adult soprano in Paris, a soprano in India, someone in Australia, someone in America. So I teach internationally, but via Skype.
Okay, so someone wouldn't need to come to see you personally?
No.
Right, okay.
They wouldn't need to see me personally.
Thank you.
Good morning, Stefan.
Good morning.
I've seen you sing, or heard you sing quite a few times at Ben Hanson's Theatre.
Oh yes,
Yes, and always really, really enjoyed you.
Thank you.
One of the things I've always loved music. I love all the big shows, you know, Les Mis, Miss Saigon, Phantom of the Opera. I think I've seen them all 3 or 4 times all around the world, and I love that type of music. Now, I do love some of the opera, if you like the popular opera songs, Nessun Dorma and all that type of things. And I love that girl singing from Tosca. That was lovely, because Maria Callas sang that beautifully.
Yes, she did.
So one of my things that I really love to see, and I see many concerts in the UK, is good singers like yourself. They go around the theatres singing songs from the musicals.
Yes.
That to me is absolutely wonderful.
Yes.
And I go to all of those type of things. I found that, like in Ben's plays, he got more and more serious, upper class, and I've lost it really. And I really like to see the popular things like you singing Fiddler on the Roof type.
If I were a rich man.
Yeah, that's exactly. But yes, I do like that. So if your singers, which I know you've got some beautiful singers, which I've seen, come down and do more from the big shows, I think you'd be packed out. I really do. I'd be there every time shouting and singing for you.
Thank you. They actually do. We do highlight versions, usually about 40 minutes long, of Phantom, Fiddler, Miss Saigon, Sound of Music.
Les and all that.
Les and all that. We do that. I sing a very good master of the house, and so we actually do it because, and in fact, I didn't have time to talk this through, but the training for, I teach jazz singers, I teach certain pop singers, the training should be the same. It is not, I'm not imposing a technique onto a singer so he sounds like an opera singer. What I'm doing is enabling the singer to use his voice, and it doesn't really matter what style, unless of course it's heavy rock. Heavy rock I can't do anything about. But what happens is that people go to these sort of pop trainers who take one element of the bel canto and call it the technique. And then you still have a one-sided voice production. Voice production should enable you to use every single muscle that you have and to allow you to free your voice. And basically, take Shirley Bassey, for instance. Fabulous voice, still singing, I don't know how old she is, in perfect nick, basically, wonderful. So there are some singers who do sing properly, sing well, and last a lifetime, as they should do. So yes, it should be the same training, basically. So with classical singers now, there's a lot more musicals which are being written in kind of like in the old style, with a damn good tune, and that you can sing, that a classical singer can sing with an operatic voice. So thank you very much.
On your left here, please.
Hi, Stefan. Thank you very much for that. So I agree with this gentleman that I think that it's better to have local, the ones we all know, and I think we're a little bit perhaps lower class in Pattaya than people in Bangkok. I don't know, but I think a lot of us here don't understand the Italian singing or the words in Italian or whatever. So I think maybe you do change it a little bit from what you sing in Bangkok. Am I correct in that way?
No, we sing the same things in Bangkok. Okay. Exactly the same repertoire. Whatever. And for Pattaya Music Club, we're quite eclectic actually, which surprised me a lot because we sing. I mean, we do sing some songs of musicals, but we also sing an art song for Pattaya Music Club. And the first time we sang for Pattaya Music Club, I was bowled over by the number of people that turned up. 250 or something like that. Which is how many? 287, which is enormous. I mean, I didn't realise there was 287 people in Pattaya who were actually interested in coming to classical music. And so I did the Siete Canciones by Manuel de Falla, we did Schubert Lieder, we did Purcell. So we kind of, you guys do listen to it. I mean, it might be easy listening classical music, but it's still classical. But I do definitely, in the programme, put non-classical, I do put musical songs in.
Yes, that's great. And the other question is, I'm very grateful that you are a Rotary member.
Oh, I am, yes.
Bangkok South, I think, you support.
That's correct, yes.
A lot of people, and we have a few members here. And the other question is, how did you end up in Thailand? I'm not sure you told us why you're in Thailand.
No, I didn't. I was going to. I didn't have time.
Maybe you don't want to tell us.
Well. No, what happened was very simple. I then moved on to another company which I took over, which was called Opera and Concert Worldwide, and we essentially, toured to the Middle East, UAE particularly, and to Southeast Asia. And I met there, I collaborated with a local musician, and he then rang me when I was at my house in Seville, and I'd gone back, and I was, and he rang me and he said, the first words he said was, I have a dream. And I said, Nelson, is that you? And he said, no, it's Songpao. So I said, oh, hello, what was your dream then? And he said, I have a dream that I'm going to sing in Thais at the Thailand Cultural Centre. Now, Thais is essentially a 3-hour opera, which is basically a duet between the soprano and the baritone for those 3 hours with a few people thrown in. So I said, somehow that's a nightmare, not a dream. He said, no, come. I said, okay. So I sang it, then I did Bohème, then I directed for him, and then I took over the company for him. I didn't take over, but I, helped him. And then I formed something called the Young Soloist Program while I was there, which was teaching people like mine. That was 7 years ago. And essentially, when I finished my contract with Sompal, they said, would I stay? The kids, would I stay and form a company? So I did, and that's. But I tend to, do things as they turn up, really, and that's how I'm here.
Thank you. Another question here. Thank you for today.
Thank you.
Hypothetically, we hear that a lot of people have bad voices and can only sing in the shower. What percentage of those would you actually turn around to a reasonable singer?
In the shower?
Not just in the shower.
I mean, there's two ways of dealing with that. When they come out of the shower and dry off and put their clothes on, I would teach them the basic physiology. It's not magic. And in fact, you don't have to start. You can. I met a very great friend of mine. She was an editor of Prestige magazine, and when I heard her speak, she spoke like a bit like that. It sounded like a bucket of nails being dropped from a very high building. And I said to her, "Your voice is all over the place, but I think I can put it back together again, a bit like a jigsaw puzzle." And so basically, if you know, this is the value of the scientific knowledge, essentially, because no amount of pre-scientific knowledge would have got her to sing. But you're essentially rehabilitating muscles. Everybody sings. Every person is able to sing. You have the muscles. I know you're doing that. If you go back to when you were 4 or 5, you will find that you were a singer. Every child is a singer. And they have strength. You listen to a baby, you can hear a baby that size crying 3 blocks away because they have a perfect vocal mechanism because it is their mechanism for survival. After the age of 4 or 5, you start to lose that ability through social conditioning. Obviously, we can't have adults running around screaming, saying, that's my ball, and crying, etc., etc. But the freedom a child has is throughout their entire body and their emotions, totally free emotions. And this is actually what you need to be a singer. So this is what we rediscover. We just go back to the muscles, realign the vocal mechanism, and essentially look for all the resonators. Now, it is true that some people can sing better than others simply by the physiology of their, by the shape of their bodies and how their muscles actually work and how effective. Because some muscles have been so out of use through social conditioning that you can't get them back. But everybody can sing. We can't all fly unless we buy a ticket. It doesn't matter how hard you flap your arms. Practice, if you throw yourself out of a 5th floor window, you're going to go straight down. But singing is different. Pre-speech, probably we sang at each other. Right, because obviously we couldn't speak, so we sang at each other, essentially. So it's a very, very deep-rooted, basically prehistoric mechanism.
I think we sort of run out of time, sir.
Sorry.
Thank you very much for your performance.
Stefan, will you be available later on for people to ask questions of you outside?
Well, absolutely.
Lovely, thank you. So anyone's got anything else to ask Stefan later. But now we'd like to present you with this. Can you... Thanks. Why did you come down the steps the easy way? Oh, more or less, yes. This is in appreciation of your talk today. Thanks very much, Stefan.